everybody, my name is Mars. You can call me MG if you'd like, and today I've got a little bit of a bookshelf audit for you guys. I've had quite a few people recently ask me questions about my book collection, and I was like, this would actually be pretty interesting as a video, so I did a ton of math to calculate some statistics about my book collection. Not as much as I was originally planning to. We're going to go through as a genre breakdown of all of the books that I own. I was also going to do a breakdown in terms of age category, like how many middle grade versus YA versus adult I have, but after doing the statistics on the genres, I was like, that's enough numbers for me. I'm not doing any more. So we're going to go through in terms of genre, both my read and unread books, and then I just have some fun little facts and statistics at the end, and then we will get a total number of my entire collection, which is something that I have not calculated in quite a while, and I have added a bunch of books to my TBR recently, but I also did an unhaul, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, where I unhauled 50 books for my collection, so the number is constantly fluctuating. Before we get to any numbers though, I do want to show you a little bit of an overview of my collection and what it looks like on my shelves, so I will cut to that now. So these two bookshelves, and there are some stacked up there, all my D&D books, but these two, I guess I should say bookcases, are where the books that I have already read live, and they are right behind my desk. You already know that because they're in the background of pretty much every video that I film. And then over here, I have my TBR cart, which is pretty much full to the brim, and also on that bottom shelf there are a few books tucked behind that didn't fit with the rest of them. One of them is War and Peace, which takes up so much space, and that's why it's in the back. But then there's also a couple of, I think it's only classics in the back, actually. But, yeah. I'm getting a little out of hand with my TBR for my personal preferences, so I should probably do something about that. So clearly, I own a lot of books. Let's just get talking about numbers. So starting off, we will talk about just my read books. So like I said, everything on these shelves behind me. And in terms of fantasy, which is definitely the genre that I own the most of, I own 134 books. Now, I did count everything by hand, and some things are a little bit weird when it comes to genre, like I didn't know exactly where to put them. And also, math is not my strong suit, so these numbers might be a little bit off in places. If you want to check my math and you find something is wrong, it's just because that's not the thing I'm best at, but I tried. So 134 fantasy books. Breaking that down into subgenres, there are 67 high fantasy, 31 portal fantasy, which is a personal favorite genre of mine. I love a good portal fantasy. I have 25 books that I consider urban fantasy and 11 historical fantasy, which I've also been really getting into in the past, I'd say year or so, but I have gotten a lot of historical fantasy from the library, so it's not as represented on my shelves. Next up, we have sci-fi, and I have 36 books that I would consider to be science fiction. 6 are like your high sci-fi or space opera type book. 5 are dystopians, 17 are paranormal, and that is part of where I kind of got a little bit mixed up, because it's a little bit hard to tell the difference between urban fantasy and paranormal sometimes. There's definitely a lot of overlap, so I just split them up the way that made the most sense to me, but a book that I consider paranormal, you might consider urban fantasy and vice versa, but that's just how I did it. I have 2 magical realism books, and then 6 that I put in an other category. I definitely consider them sci-fi, but I'm not quite sure what kind of sci-fi they would be. An example of this would be Ice Planet Barbarians, which is a romance sci-fi, and I didn't want to put it in the space opera, even though it technically does take place in space, because it didn't quite feel right to me, but I also didn't know what else to consider it, so that is one of the books in the other category, and there's just a handful of other ones, especially ones with time travel. Books with time travel, I guess, could be their own subgenre, but I don't have a ton of those, so it's just all in the other category. And then we have a few genres that I did not break down into the subgenres the way I did for fantasy and sci-fi, because I either don't have a ton of them or I just don't like care about the subgenre breakdown as much. So for this category, I have 38, and that breaks down to 20 books that are mystery or thriller. I want to be honest, I don't totally understand the difference between mystery and thriller, so that's why I kind of lumped them together. I have 11 horror books, 5 contemporary, and 2 historical. And then finally, we have my miscellaneous category, and this is everything that is not a regular novel. So there are 113 books in this category, so just after fantasy, this is the highest number, and this breaks down to 12 nonfiction books, 14 anthologies, 23 plays, most of which are Shakespeare, but not all of them. I have 24 poetry books, 10 classics, which I guess technically are regular novels, but I put them in a separate category. I keep them shuffled out of my general fiction collection. I have 6 D&D books. I have 21 manga, comics, graphic novels. I kind of lumped all of those together. And then I have 3 puzzle books because I guess they kind of count as stories because it's volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Myrtle, so there is a story along with the puzzles, but also the main focus of the book is the puzzles. So I figured I would consider them as part of this collection as well. So if you add all of those numbers together, assuming that I got my math correct, that is 321 books on my read bookshelves, or bookcases, whichever words you prefer. Moving on to my unread books, my TBR, I have 13 fantasy books, 10 of which are high fantasy, 1 urban fantasy, and 2 historical fantasy. I have 10 total science fiction books on my TBR, 3 space opera / high sci-fi, 1 dystopian, 3 paranormal, and 3 magical realism. For the genres that I did not break down into subgenres, I have 8, 3 of which are mystery or thriller, 3 horror, 1 contemporary, and 1 historical. And then for those miscellaneous categories, I have 13 books. 1 is nonfiction, 3 are anthologies, 1 play, 1 poetry, 5 classics, and 2 graphic novels, but like I said, in my read collection that also goes along with manga and comics, it just so happens that on my TBR, they're both graphic novels. So that brings us to a grand total of 44 unread books, which is about twice how I normally like to keep it. I feel like in the past year or so, I've been super bad about taking books into my collection and reading them. I used to be so good about reading books in a timely manner. This past year I've been bad about that. So normally my TBR, I like to keep it between 20 or 30. 44 is quite high. I definitely have to do something about that. But if you add together my read and unread books, again, assuming I got the math correct, that is 365, which is admittedly not as much as I see a lot of people here on BookTube have. For me, that feels like a really good number. I think at the height of my book collecting, I had somewhere around 500, but I've definitely culled that quite a bit, obviously, as that number has gone down drastically. I am someone who loves to collect books and I love having a large collection, but I also don't want to keep books just for the sake of having that number increase. You know, I only want to keep books that have a special place in my heart and that I really enjoyed. And now moving on to those fun facts. So I thought it'd be cool to figure out who my most owned authors were, which honestly, I didn't even need to count the books to figure this out. Like, I already knew who they would be, but I did count how many I have by each of these authors. So the number 1 author on my shelf is, of course, Rick Riordan. He has this entire shelf, minus Tusk Love there. That's just there because I think the cover's pretty and I want to show it off. But I have 24 of his books. Then the number 2 author is quite close with 21, is John Flanagan, and that's this entire shelf. Those are definitely 2 authors that I've loved since I was a child, so it makes sense that I would have the most books by them. The number 3 slot is Lemony Snicket, and you can't see his books on my shelf. They're actually on the shelf, but like behind my chair. The reason that I have a lot from him is because the series of Unfortunate Event books, there's 13 of those, so that makes up the bulk of my Lemony Snicket, and then I just have 3 of his other books. So honestly, it's not surprising that those are my most owned authors. Something else that I thought was interesting is that I have 4 different duplicate copies of books. I'm not someone who has to like collect every edition of my favorite books, but I do have a few duplicates. So for Inkheart, which is a book that I've loved for many, many years, I own it obviously in English because that's the language I read books in, but I also have an edition that I bought in Germany that is in German. If you do not know, that's the original language that these books were written and published in, and so I thought it would just make sense for me to have that. I also have an Italian edition of A Little Something Different by Sandy Hall. This isn't a book that I like love or anything, but it is very sentimental to me. Sandy Hall and I actually come from the same hometown, and so I met her when this is her debut novel. When it was released, she did like a book signing at the library, and she found out that myself and a couple of other people who were there were studying Italian in school, and she's like, I actually just got a box of copies of the Italian edition of my book. Do y'all want some? And we were like, yeah, sure. So that's why I have that. I have 2 copies of A Dark and Secret Magic by Wallace Kinney, who is a very dear friend of mine. I got to meet her last fall when she was on her book tour. So I have the original edition, and I also have the unplugged book box edition because she did get a special edition of her book. You also can't see, it's like right here, half peeking out behind my chair. It's so beautiful. I love that edition. But then I also have 2 copies of A Midsummer Night's Dream because it is my favorite Shakespeare, and so I just have 2 random editions of it that I think both of them are really cute. Out of the 360 plus books that I own, 13 of them are signed, plus I have a 14th on my TBR card. I actually just pulled I think it was like a Fae Crate or a Luma Crate edition out of a Little Free Library, so adding another signed book to my collection. I would say it's about 50-50 in terms of books that I got signed when I met the author versus books that I bought that just happened to be signed. So I think that's pretty interesting. The first book that I ever bought with my own money is still part of my collection, and that is in fact Inkheart. I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, and I used my allowance to buy it from a used bookstore, and it just so near and dear to me. I love that series to this day, and I am never getting rid of that copy of Inkheart. My favorite book of all time, which if you've been here for any amount of time on this channel, you probably already know this, but it is The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. Absolutely adore that book. I read it every September as a birthday gift to myself, and I'm very much looking forward to my reread this year. And then, the next book that I will be reading off of my physical TBR is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I actually have 3 Leigh Bardugo books that I will be reading as part of a taste test, but the other 2 are from the library. This is one that I got out of a Little Free Library, which is where I get a lot of books, and I think that's why I collect a lot, and I've been bad about reading them because I see something from a Little Free Library and it's free, so I might as well take it, and it just, it all piles up. But I will be reading Shadow and Bone for a vlog coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. And that is all of the information that I have for you guys today. I hope you found it interesting. I thought it was pretty neat to pull together all of these facts and statistics. Let me know what you think down in the comments, but we have now come to the end of the video. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can subscribe to my channel for more content, and that way I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye everyone!